Hey there, I'm going to get right into the video because a lot of you are probably going to be coming on here. You don't care for me to introduce myself or tell you anything else, so we're going to get directly into it. This, over the past couple of weeks, I've had with me, I'm going to put a disclaimer, Fujifilm US sent me the 33mm 1.4. This lens right here has been a great lens to use. I have my opinions on it. The opinions are mine. In no way, shape, or form has Fujifilm handed anything to me in exchange for this as in compensation. I use this, I send it back, I do not get to keep this. And with my opinions, I just want to point out I am not looking to shit on lenses. The only reason I'm making this is because I want people to be aware of the fiscal responsibility they have with making sure that they are using their money responsibly, as well as basically when you're making an investment in a lens like this, what are you exactly paying extra for versus something of comparable power being the 35 1.4. The original lens, is it slower? Are the images not as good? Is it sharper? What exactly is going? Because there's a lot of stuff floating around and I just kind of want to put a rest to it. So in my test case scenario, which there will be more testing going on with this, as I'm going to get a 35 f2 to go along with it. I have done shoots. I actually rented out a studio, got people to come in so that I could shoot wide open, stop down, etc. I had people walk towards me, basically recreating a wedding ceremony situation, as well as I practiced or tested tracking to see how sticky it was, hit rate, things like that. When it comes to video, this will do just fine with video. I actually recorded the video with this, but it won't be showing up, but it's going to do just fine, as well as some caveats and things that I'll be putting out here, telling people what I think this is best for, hobbyist, professional, if the price is right. And so with all that, let me get into it and say right off the bat, this lens is not an $800 lens. This lens should have been priced somewhere around $650, $700. This is not an $800 lens. What you're paying for in regards to, I'm not sure how much this lens is brand new. I'm sure it's somewhere around $500-$600. But what you're getting for this lens is not $200 to $300 more of a lens. And I just want to put that out there. I think Fujifilm really missed an opportunity because this lens, the price is too goddamn high. Shout out to my mentor, Flossie Carter. This is not a well-priced lens. This is $800. It is not an $800 lens. I just want to get that out of the way. And because of that, I just want to go ahead and put this up front. If you're a hobbyist, someone shooting photos of your kids, taking pictures of just street and things like that, this is a lens I would not recommend buying. This is not a good buy. I know it's weather sealed. I know you guys like the linear motors. Buy the 35 f2. I'm actually going to be purchasing the 35 f2 with my own money to put up against this so I can further solidify that. But if you want something and you have to have weather sealing, the 35 f2. If you want something you don't care about weather sealing and you want the 1.4, 35 1.4. This is a lens that is I believe is a specialty lens for wedding and documentary photographers. It is going to benefit them in every single way. But for just a heads up, if you are a hobbyist, if you are someone who maybe this is a second income for you, and this is a lens you want to carry around just to have on your body, this would be a little bit of a waste of money in my opinion, unless you have the money to spend. But even then, just because you have the money to spend doesn't mean it's a wise decision to spend that money on something that I think gives you no benefit that's discernible for $200 or $300 over this lens right here, the 35 1.4. Let me also go ahead and say that during my testing, every single time that I tested these lenses, they were on identical bodies. When I did an A/B testing side by side with models to where I had them keep a pose so I can shoot back and forth, I had Fujifilm send me an identical XE4. It's even silver. So the same sensor, same processor, everything like that, to make sure that there was no discrepancy between sensor generation and processor generation, as well as firmware update and algorithm. Everything was the exact same. And whenever I shot on the XH1 for the second day of shooting, because I did a couple days of shooting for studio portraits, on the second day I both had them on the XH1 when I was shooting, and I primarily used the 33 1.4 so that I could look at things from a standpoint of using it in field versus just having a cute side-by-side with 35 1.4, because we know what this lens does and what it brings, period. And just to give you a heads up, it is not much different than this lens right here. As much as Fujifilm wants you to believe, the biggest thing about this lens and the best thing is that it resolves up to 40 megapixels, meaning you'll get the full sensor resolution if you switch to an XH2 or for future Fujifilm lenses or bodies, you'll be able to resolve the complete resolution of these lenses. That's where this lens has its biggest benefit. The other thing I want to say is that the video jumps in and out at all. I am still testing settings with the 50mm f2. The f2 lenses have given me issues issues with recording before. Usually I'm recording on 35-1.4 for all my videos, so if you ever see jitter in my videos, it's with an f2 lens. I'm trying to test out some new things because I want to make a video helping some people out with their Fujifilm autofocus settings for cameras that are X-T3 and below, because the processing power isn't seen as great, but also for use with lenses that are legacy. So getting into that, I'm going to go in. I have this here for my benefit, for my review, so that I can discuss exactly what I'm talking about, and I'll put the photos up while I'm talking about them. The first thing I'm going to talk about is speed and capture speed, because I made the mistake of formatting a card after I did this test, because I did it before I had all my models come into the room. There is a long hallway, probably about 10 meters long, and I had one model walk back and forth to me, or walk to me, straight away to me, kind of like as if someone was shooting a wedding. So they're walking to me. She's a little bit faster paced than what a wedding couple would be walking down the aisle, or what a bride would be walking down, but I figured I want it to be as crazed and fast paced as possible so that I could get correct shooting. So I shot on both the XE4s, and then I also took turns on the XH1 with both of them. The XH1, I wish I would have done a little bit more testing, but as far as testing with the XH1, I can tell you right now, let me pull up my percentages. So when it comes to the 35-1.4 and the 33-1.4, when shooting on the XH1 with a mechanical shutter, the 33 and 35 actually performed the exact same when the model was looking at me the way I'm looking at you, and then started walking direct, meaning their face was in focus before they started walking. I saw where they were facing me, there was no side profile. They performed exactly the same in mechanical shutter at the highest frame rate. When it comes to electronic shutter, the 33-1.4 hit 100%, the 33-1.4 hit 95% of its shots, and the 35-1.4 hit 90% of its shots. So basic, in case if I shot 100 of those, 95 would be clear on here and 90 would be clear on here. The only issue that I had was when the model got closer to me and their face became bigger in the frame. This did a little of a stutter and it breathed for just a second, versus this one where it just wasn't catching up with the focus. It basically, like, whenever they got closer, it kind of hit its limit with focusing, and then it focused again real sharp. I'm not sure what that was, but that's just with this in the XH1. Now, shooting on the electronic shutter, there was a larger gap because there are more images in between. So when it comes to electronic shutter with the model coming directly straight at me, it was about the same, 90% here, 95% here. It was just made a little bit bigger because there's more frames in there, but it was the same thing. Whenever she got too close, this started to breathe, and this one just stopped focusing randomly, but then picked it up like that. So it was not a big deal. Again, I would say if you're shooting 20 frames per second on autofocus, this would maybe have one slightly out of focus. And when I mean slightly out of focus, I mean like maybe her shoulders were in focus instead of her eye, or maybe her hair was in focus instead of her eye, but then immediately came back. This one, it breathed to where maybe for 2 frames, nothing was in focus, and then it came back. When it comes to shooting on the XE4, which has the latest processor and sensor, and shooting with both of these, when it came to mechanical, the 33-1.4 did start seeing an improvement with the new bodies. So on mechanical, again, these were identical when she was walking straight at me. But what I did with the XE4 was I actually, after the first time in mechanical having her walk straight at me, I had her turn a corner so there was a side profile, and then see how quick they could catch. On both the electronic shutter and both the mechanical shutter, whenever using both of these in continuous focus and it having to catch her face from side profile, the 33-1.4 did catch the face quicker. And then from there, they performed identical all the way through, finishing up where they focused all the way through to her walking past me, to the point of where they couldn't focus anymore, basically where their focus limit was. So again, from going from straight on, if I had them walk out and all you saw was profile, so not catching an eye, this actually caught on faster. And when it did, it locked on, period. And then from there, once she straight on, they performed identical. The issue with the 35-1.4, whenever doing the same exact test, was that when it saw the side of her face, it may have caught her, but when she turned straight, this breathed for about 2 or 3 frames. Every single time. No matter what I did, what setting I changed, this would breathe for about 2 or 3 frames. Now, I'm sure this had to do some focusing as she got closer as well, and maybe catch on. But the thing is, I'm pretty sure with this older motor, and it being extending outside of the barrel. When she turned and caught in just a little twitch, that breathing, that hesitation, the stutter, as my boy Jason Kiefer and Darren Lingerfeld, we've talked about this. It's the same thing as with the 56 1.2 and the 50 1.0. The breathing was an issue with this. Not for a whole bunch, but for a couple frames it did. Now, when she's walking towards me, they performed identical, meaning they caught everything. Again, having a newer body with a newer sensor, with the newer firmware, even an XT3 with their newest firmware would probably perform about the same as this. You're going to be able to catch everything. But I just want to say that because if you're a wedding or a documentary photographer, you can't afford to not be able to focus when someone turns their head, if it's locked onto one person or the other. This lens will be a little bit more reliable. Well, I'll just say it will be more reliable. I don't want to say a little bit because this did miss about 2 to 3 frames. In the electronic shutter, it turned out to be about 5 or 6 frames because there's more frames in between. So when you need those frames, this is why I see this as a benefit for someone who is a photographer, who is in weddings, potentially even events. I still wouldn't even recommend it for events if you're indoors. Go and picking this over this, because this 350-400 U's is a way better bargain than this, and all you're getting is the linear motor, which I'm starting to think linear motors are another marketing ploy, kind of like autofocus points among camera companies. I'm not seeing the huge benefit of linear motors whenever it comes to newer sensors and processors, to where it's blowing these lenses out of the water. That's why I want to test it with 35 f2, because I'm pretty sure I'm going to get similar results out of the 33 1.4 and 35 f2. And that'll actually bring me to my next point when it comes to clarity in images and sharpness, and basically, is there a difference? Is this a better lens optically than the 35 1.4? Because we've seen this does perform better in tracking. Even though it seems minute, I have to say this is better in tracking than the 35 1.4 whenever it comes to tracking someone walking down like you would if you're a wedding photographer or a documentary photographer, or someone who's shooting things like bands and they're moving in and out, and you don't want to miss someone just because something steps in their way or they turn their head in low light. When it comes to optical quality, there's a couple things I want to reference. The biggest thing is I'm looking at these images and I'm actually going through them myself. Beautiful young lady here. A lot of these people that I asked, it's their first time modeling or they're brand new models. So I always try to get people who maybe have never done it or want help or need headshots, because I don't want the same look, and it's just a nice thing to do. So I hook them up with this. But I can tell you right now, looking at the 33 1.4, when I had this and was shooting just this alone, I kept telling myself, man, the micro contrast is so much better. Man, it just has a little bit more pop. The way that it renders skin tone, etc. It's head and shoulders above. Man, they really knocked it out of the park. Then I shot it side by side with 35 1.4, and I realized I wanted this to be a badass lens. And there is deeper micro contrast. That is nice. There is more latitude also in people's skin tones. I think part of that is because the term I use is clinical. Like the F2 Trio from Fujifilm, everything's more clinical, and it's not that it's more cool or it's more subdued. It's just that this, and you guys know it if you have a 35 1.4, has a really, really kind of impactful warmth to it, and that's just part of the optics. So if you take away the warmth and you add in some micro contrast, and it is noticeable micro contrast because you can see skin breathe on models a little bit more, as you'll see when we pop through. Those are the only two things that would benefit you in post. Are you going to see a difference between the 35 1.4 and this? No, you're not. Until I get an XH2 in my hand from Fujifilm. Yeah, until Fujifilm sends me the XH2, and until I buy the XH2, you won't see the benefit with a 33 1.4. So if you're not planning on moving from your XT4 or anything older than that to buy the XH2 or the new lenses, you won't see the benefit of this until you get to those bodies. Because on the XE4, which I had these on 2 identical XE4s, like I said, same exact settings, everything, this did not perform optically better at 1.4 or even at F4, which I shot all the studio shots at. I could have gone further down, but I was intentionally using some very, very dark lighting techniques because I wanted to be moody. So I stayed at F4, which again, portraits, you guys should be not shooting wide open in portraits in studio situations. F4 to F11, always, till I die. If you think any different, Tell me that you're a hobbyist who watched Tony and Chelsea Northrup more than you need to, without telling me you're a hobbyist who watched Tony and Chelsea Northrup more than you need to. So there is not a big difference in basically any single thing when it comes to these two. And I only learned that from shooting side by side. Now you can ask some of my buddies, Dorian Coleman, Lee DeLeon, Jason Kiefer, my boy Nick Irwin, Darren Lingefelt. I kept saying, man, this lens, a 33-1.4, there's something special. Then I shot them side by side, and trust me, it's not as special optically. That's why right now, in my mind, this is not an $800 lens. Now again, when you get to the XH2, this will have a benefit if you are printing. If you do not print or own a printer, or if you do not send your images to be blown up anywhere past, I would say maybe by, an 8x10, this lens is a little bit overkill and is not really that beneficial to you, and it won't give you anything extra. You will not have a huge benefit using this lens. I want to put that out there because it's very, very honest. That's why I think this is a $600 lens, but for $800, I can't see it. $600, $650 at the most, $800, I can't say this is a major go. There is a difference between these two. One that I feel like benefits the 35-1.4. Some people call it softness because when you shoot this wide open, it's kind of soft on skin and things like that. But I like to shoot this lens at around, usually my portrait's 1.8 to 2.8. I've just always rolled like that because I want the full model to be, or the full person getting their portrait done, or anything to be in focus, because they pick that outfit, everything. I don't like just an eyeball being in focus. This has that warmth to it, and this also, the way that this renders light is fantastic because it gives kind of a soft wrapped in light effect. To get the same effect out of the 33-1.4, I did consider if I should put a Glimmer Glass 1 on here, which I don't have because this has a different filter size thread, because this is 58mm filter thread. And so I don't have a Glimmer Glass 1 for that. But in order for me to get the exact same look from here, or from the 35-1.4, which is to me a look that a lot of people like, on the 33, I think if I slapped a Glimmer Glass 1, I could have that same look, and I wouldn't be sacrificing the micro contrast or just contrast in general. So that is a good thing. But as I'm looking through these images and you're looking through them, you'll notice that a lot of them look the same because they are. I took a photo of a model, told them to keep that same pose, and then grabbed the other camera and took a photo. They were back to back. So a lot of these look similar, and you're also going to notice I've been putting them up there. These aren't the same image side by side to fill up the whole screen. These are images directly from each one of these. I just didn't put the title of where they came from because they look the same. They look the same at 1.4. They look the same at f4. Period. There's nothing to it. That's why I'm saying if you're a street photographer, this makes no sense. This lens makes no sense. If you're a hobbyist, this lens makes no sense. If you have the money to buy it, you can, but I still don't think it makes any sense. Period. You can get you this lens right here, this 35-1.4, for about $350, $400 used is what I usually see it, and this will do. And if you want weatherproofing, shoot the 35 f2. Because even though it wasn't my favorite lens, I'm more going to like, hey, you know what, maybe that could be something in my kit just because of this lens right here, because I like the micro contrast for studio work. And if me goes and transitions to shooting more studio, I can see that having a big benefit for me. And because also this lens, honestly, at 1.4, it is not better than the 35-1.4 any discernible way whatsoever. When you get to f2, the micro contrast starts to pop. You start getting more in focus. You can really see how maybe this will do better when it resolves in the XH2. I'm sure it will. But that's with that being said, it's a similar formula to the f2 Trio, I'm sure, just by the way that this looks when you pull in the RAWs and you start to edit it. And so because of that, I can confidently say, because of that, the 35 f2 would probably be just as good as this at f2, period. And it might even, and I'm going to get these together because it might even focus faster because it has less elements, or the elements aren't moving as far as they do on this big baby right here. So when it comes to that and the side-by-side, there to me isn't a huge benefit, just plain and simple. But one thing I can say is that this lens formula, even though there's not a huge discernible difference at 1.4 and at f4, there is still, as I'm going through these models, there is something to say about when a lens like this is very clinical, has no color cast towards a certain way, whether warm or cool. Like Viltrox, you have a lot cooler feel to those versus the legacy Fujifilm lenses, which are very warm. Like the 90f2, very warm. 35-1.4, pretty warm as well. Because this has more of a flat shot to it, and because the contrast is so good, the micro contrast, the images that I'm getting when you crop in, the skin, it breathes more and it looks more similar to the 50mm 1.0. Now, again, after I start editing, it's kind of a wash because of the way I edit to where you can't see the difference. But if you were shooting just straight JPEG portraits with these and you just wanted to use a film simulation, you would see a little bit of a benefit. And that's why I'm telling you, if you're a wedding photographer, this might be a great lens for you. If you're a documentary photographer or an editorial photographer, meaning you're being hired by someone and commissioned to shoot work, this may be a great lens for you. And some of the images I'm talking about, this girl right here, she's sitting crisscross, looking up and everything like that. The texture in her hair and things like that, I'm sure that I could get a similar look at a 35-1.4, but I couldn't get the exact look because of the way it handles highlights and because everything seems very bloomy and angelic. Because of this lens being so flat, I'm able to punch deeper into the highlights and the darks to get more of a realistic representation of it. And from there in post, I'm able to edit it if I wanted it to bloom out more. Now me, with the way that I've created my own personal presets that I put on things, I usually like that. But whenever I started using this lens, I saw the benefit of not blooming highlights and not really making not making black so flat. If you've seen any of my photos, whether it be with the San Antonio missions, whenever I was commissioned to do some portraits and some marketing for them, or for the PBR with the Bullman and ABBI, you'll notice that a lot of my images seem very cloudy is the way I would say. Not cloudy as in hazy, but and people have said, wow, angelic and stuff like that. It's just because this lens right here, when you have a little bit of backlight, light wraps around it. And so as you see, as I'm going through this, I'll put a few of them up. I'm looking at one of the females. Everything is just as it should be. It's the best way I can put it. It doesn't have too much pop and it's not too flat. And that's because I edited that way. When I got the image in, it looked kind of like, I would say, like an Eterna look, like it's very flat. When you're shooting with these new Fujifilm lenses with this new formula, it reminds me of shooting in like an F-Log for RAW, because the or F-Log for photos in your RAWs, because the micro contrast is nicer. Of course, it has the ability to resolve more, which helps you out, but also there is no color cast. And I can't say enough how big of a deal that is, because when you have a warm color cast in your lens, like let's say the 90f2 has a really warm color cast. If I was shooting someone with olive skin, there's a chance, if I'm not aware of my lighting situation, 3200 isn't always 3200, 4800 isn't always 4800, and I'm having issue with lighting everywhere to where I have two separate lights and they don't match. That's whenever you get people with olive skin looking like they have jaundice. That's whenever you get people with deeper melanin skin looking a lot redder in the hue of the cheeks than they actually are. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's how you get people with brown skin to where they're also looking a lot redder in the face, almost plum-like, too much magenta, to where you have to adjust that when it's got this warm cast. That's why you get people with fairer skin, white people, to where it doesn't look too natural, and then you're trying to adjust your greens, it's a back and forth thing. Everything's looking way cooler. Okay, I need to add in the cooler side. Then they look overly blue and they look pastier. When you don't have a color cast, you really have a lot more room. And where that benefits you is in situations like this with a studio. I have a red backdrop and I'm able to separate the multiple people from that red backdrop. Now with this woman, she is white. She was very fair skinned. She did not have an issue with the color cast of the red making her skin pinker after I edited with RAW. Now in the RAW, which I don't put up my RAWs, please everyone stop. Like, I don't like to edit. I edit videos for a living and I don't like to do all the extra editing. I'm putting up JPEGs I've already exported. She did not have a pink overcast on her, which for those of you that are aware in studio session, when there's harsh light going off of a background of a color, sometimes people with fair skin, they take on that color. She did not have that because I got to dial down the red tones and the mid tones. It was the saturation of reds. It was fantastic, and I got to do that individually for her versus everyone else where I didn't have to do that. That's the benefit. And then I still got to put in more luminance in the reds, and it completely just worked out for me to where I was able to separate her from that in the background. Her being blonde also, I was able to make sure there wasn't any color cast. These are things you're looking for if you're pixel peeping. Now, if you're not pixel peeping, you won't notice, which is another reason why I just can't see as this being a huge upgrade unless you're doing documentary, unless you're doing wedding. And then the same thing as I keep going through, woman with red hair, again, you're going to see the contrast where it really steps in, the micro contrast, to really be able to separate those multiple colors and those layers. You're also seeing it with the way that it wraps around skin. One thing I will say is this blooms skin, this blooms highlights. Sometimes whenever you're shooting someone and they have a highlight on their forehead or along their cheekbone and things like that, this does such a good job of blooming that it kind of washes it out, and it'll wash out the skin around them. It'll be gradual to wash it out. This, you can get that full resolve back, or that full amount of data back from those highlighted areas to where you can actually mute it. One thing that I did with this woman right here was she had a lot of highlighter on her face. She's a makeup artist, so she made sure to make that, you know, nice and bang and ball, and what, I don't know what you girls call it, but able to roll back highlights on her face even from where the makeup was intentionally placed to make her glow a little bit more. So I actually focused on moving the lamp closer and further back on her to see how it would test with that. So some of these images, the light's pretty close, but being able to roll off with this, I know I'm getting more information, because on her cheeks, with how much she bloomed there, because again, the makeup, this I was able to pull back more and get more detail on the hair around that area, versus this, which would have naturally bloomed the hair around that area, if that makes sense. So again, there are benefits to this lens. I just don't see them as a $3 or $200 benefit. I even don't understand why they didn't cut the price of this lens, a 35 1.4, and began selling this one at around the $600 price tag. Again, I don't agree with that, Fujifilm. Please don't stop. Please don't stop sending, or I don't know how to play it. Keep sending me stuff. I like reviewing it. I will be honest with it. This is a damn good lens, but for 95% of you guys out there who aren't doing this full time, this is not for you. This is not a lens for you. Now again, I'm looking through these images. Beautiful in the way it does it. And I'm telling you right now, if you were to see my screen and blow them up, you would be able to see the way the skin breathes and what I mean by the micro contrast being fantastic, because especially in lighting like this, just the transition and the fall off for shadows. And maybe that's the best way to put it. Transition and fall off in shadows. This has a beautiful angelic transition and fall off in light. It's amazing. The light wraps around you. But this lens right here for shadows, if you're someone who uses the mask a lot in Lightroom or in Capture One, basically to bring up an area that's underexposed, like maybe exposed for your backdrop, and then you're bringing up your shadows in someone's face, this is a really good lens for that. This lens will be really beneficial if that's the way you're rolling. I have nothing bad to say about this lens really, but the price. If this lens was priced at $699, I would say this is a no-brainer. But that $100 difference, I'm just not seeing what this is for. And I mean $699 after tax, like $700 after tax. You're still paying tax on top of this. Even more than that, when it comes to this lens, if this thing was $650, I would say that this is a still of a lens. This is fantastic. Everyone, this is a great lens to upgrade to. I probably would even buy this to go alongside this. This would live on my XE4 for personal work, and this would live for my professional work. I just can't say that this is a lens that I'd want to buy. And now, because the price that it's at, and I'm seeing there's not a huge difference between this lens at 35 1.4, that's why I'm buying with my own money the 35 f2 to put head to head against this, to check the speed, to check the focusing, to check the tracking, rendering, highlights, shadow roll off, etc., etc. I want to check that because I just feel like Fujifilm missed an opportunity to create a great lens and price it accordingly, instead of saying, well, what'll market give us? If Canon's pricing it at this, we can price it at that. Fujifilm is going to give you a heads up. You're not Canon because you rely on us, the YouTuber, us, the actual user, to do all your marketing. And you have to recognize that. If you want this to be in people's hands, you got to change this price. And you can't do this again. The 18 1.4, as much as I love it, it's not a $1,000 lens. It is not. The 23 1.4, I'm sure, is not going to be a $900 lens. It won't. Yes, it has weather sealing, but weather sealing is not worth $200 in its own. Yes, it has linear motors, but again, linear motors to me is becoming as big a gimmick as autofocus points on a sensor. How is it that Sony still has the best autofocus in the game and they quote unquote don't have as many autofocus points mapping around the area of the actual sensor as Canon does? How is it that Nikon is the Z9 from first testing on pre-production units has similar focus to the R3 and it's got about 500 less focusing points? It's a gimmick. Linear motors is a gimmick. It's all about the algorithm and people's processing speed. And when you put this on the X-T4, I'm sure it would perform even better, especially this lens right here. So can you use the 35 1.4 for the same events, wedding situations of 33 1.4 and be happy? Yes, you can. Can you be successful? Yes, you can. But if you want that little extra bit of assured just readiness and you know you're going to get the job done, buy the 33 1.4 if you're being paid for work. Can the 33 1.4 do everything the 35 does for shooting things at home, family, friends, hobby, walk around, street photography? Yes, it can. Is it worth it? No, not at all. Look at 35 1.4, look at the 35 f2, because this lens doesn't even get to its basically, wow, that's a nice badass lens, until you get to f2. Mind you, again, this girl at the front is the only one that I shot at 1.4 intentionally to check out to see, and I shot very close on her a lot of the images to see if what deep peer review someone said that, oh, this is way sharper, the 35 1.4 is way sharper than the 33 1.4 wide open in the center. It's not. There's no difference. You can't always trust everything. Sometimes people get bad copies. Deep peer review also shoots a lot of their stuff. They're shooting flowers and walls, and that's not what this lens basically is 100% for. So there is that. Focusing speeds when it comes to how quick did it track on someone who's just a standing subject like a portrait, there's basically no difference. But where you do see it is this thing at f4. This is one of the best lenses I've ever used, stop down, right up there with the 51.0, because it can resolve that extra bit to 40 megapixels. That's it. That's my basically my rundown right now of this lens. Is it worth it? Not for the price. I say if you wait to get this thing on the used market, that'll be really, really nice. Even $50 off would be better than paying the full $800 for it. But I just can't, me personally, recommend it because I no longer am probably going to buy this lens, even though, man, I really thought I would. But yeah, it's a good lens. It's fantastic. But everything that's shown on here is nothing that this lens can't do stop down at f1.4 also. And because of that, taking that into account, I can't wholeheartedly say this is a huge improvement. It's an improvement. Has weather sealing, has linear motors. But for, you know, $200, no. Used market version of this for $350 versus $800 for, you know, $450. No, it's not. It's not that much better of a lens. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them down below. I'm going to be getting the 35 f2 to be able to create a second part to this, a part 2 on how it stacks up against that with performance. Again, if you're stuck on the fact that I need the 1.4 because I shoot in low light, I don't believe you, because people, they're geared. We are not nocturnal. We are geared towards light, and people love to shoot in light. That's why you all talk about the apps. That's why everyone talks about golden hour, because you like light. Stop with the cap about, damn, I need 1.4 because I love to shoot in low light. Stop it. Fucking stop, bro. Stop. You're embarrassing yourself. No, you don't need 1.4. You would like 1.4. You don't need it. And listen, you got to learn, you don't always have to shoot in 1.4 if you have 1.4. Bokeh doesn't always look good. Sometimes it looks lame as hell. Start telling a story with the subject, with the background, etc., etc. That's it. I'm off my soapbox, off my high horse. I hope you enjoyed it. That's it for this, the 33 1.4 versus 35 1.4. Better lens, not worth the money though. Have a good one.